Bereshis, Noach, Hashem creates the world. Hashem brings a flood. Those are not Jewish things. Those are universal things. But it's often said that Avraham Avinu is the first Jew. That's a very common expression that is used. The question is, it's a little bit of an ambiguous expression. What makes somebody a Jew? You know, there's a popular saying that people say today. People think Judaism is based on who your mother is. In reality, Judaism is based on who your children are, meaning to say a real Jew is someone that's going to have Jewish children, and therefore it's almost like your Judaism is defined by the future rather than the past. But based on that definition, Avraham is not a Jew because Avraham had a non-Jewish child, Yishmael and Yitzchak. And even Yitzchak is not totally Jewish because Yitzchak has an Esav. So really, if we define a Jew as someone all of whose children are part of the Jewish nation, then technically the first Jew would be Yaakov. And even that is problematical because if we connect Judaism with Torah, well, the Torah was not given till after the Jews left Mitzrayim, right? So Avraham was not commanded to keep the Torah. He was commanded to have circumcision. Yitzchak, Yaakov were not commanded. Now granted, Chazal do have a tradition that Avraham Avinu, and by extension Yitzchak, Yaakov, and the tribes, did keep the Torah even before it was given. That's a very important klal. Chazal understood that the Avos kept the Torah ad shelo nitna. The Ramban wants to say perhaps they only kept the Torah when they were in Eretz Yisrael, not when they were in Chutz La'aretz. That's one possibility. Maharal does not like that. But it's important to understand that when we say the Avos kept the Torah before it was given, this was not a commandment on them. They were not commanded to do it. They did this on their own. Now, I'll go back and explain what do we mean that Avraham is the first Jew. I didn't forget that point, but I just want to finish this digression for a moment. If the Avos were not commanded to keep the Torah, how did they know what the Torah says? Avraham, we would say, wore tefillin. Avraham kept kashrus. Avraham kept Shabbos. Avraham did not wear woolen linen. How did Avraham know that? There was no divine commandment. Circumcision was a divine commandment. And the answer is an answer that really we can't even begin to understand. He knew it by spiritual intuition. He looked at the world and he looked at the structure of the universe. And he said, yeah, if I don't wear woolen linen, I bring blessing into the world. If I wear woolen linen, bad things happen. In other words, the same way that each of us has some type of intuition, most people, unless they're psychotic, understand intuitively that it's wrong to kill, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to hurt people for no particular reason. And we would know this even without God commanding it, because our souls that are the divine soul, the divine breath of God, understand certain ideas of right and wrong. Now, I understand that a skeptic would say no such thing. There are skeptics who will actually say everything is environmentally conditioned, meaning the only reason I know not to kill people is because I was told from the time I was a little kid that it's wrong to kill. Meaning to say without that there would be no natural morality at all. Some say that. I think Judaism does not understand things that way. Judaism understands that implanted in every soul is an inherent sense of what is good and what is bad, and that comes from God. But here is the thing. Our natural intuition only goes so far. So I can intuit that it's wrong to kill and it's wrong to steal. But I'm not going to figure out by my intuition, got to wear tefillin and keep kosher. But the truth of the matter is, remember the saying of Chazal, God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah was the blueprint of the world. The world was constituted in such a way that the mitzvos of the Torah bring blessing into the world. And the averos against the Torah is makalkel. It ruins the shefa of blessing. Now that doesn't mean I personally will get the blessing. I mean, after all, tzaddikim suffer. Right? We're not saying, I don't want to walk away and tell you, if you keep the mitzvos, nothing bad will ever happen to you. We know that's not true. But in terms of the world, the universe even, every mitzvah that we do brings blessing. So the intuition of the Avos, particularly Avraham, was of such an unimaginable magnitude, we can't even describe it, that he was able to intuit all 613 commandments from looking at the world the same way that we, on our much lower level, can intuit it's wrong to kill, wrong to steal. So it's important to remember this. The Avos did not keep the Torah because of direct revelation. The Avos did not keep the Torah because of some divine command. God gave them very few commandments. God commanded Avraham to do bris milah, and later God commanded Yaakov not to eat the sciatic nerve. Right? But there were God didn't command them about tefillin, about Shabbos, but they saw. And Avraham really, because Yitzchak and Yaakov essentially just received the tradition from Avraham. It was Avraham that saw these things as vehicles of godliness. So, in one sense, you might say that Avraham is the first Jew, going back to my first question, because he is the one that actually saw the totality of the Torah in the structure of the universe. That might be one explanation of why he is the first Jew. The second explanation is that he is the first person with whom God made a covenant that was separate from a covenant with the entire human race. Now, God did make a covenant with Noah. After the flood, Noah and his children and their wives were the only people who survived. Actually, there are a few odds and ends, actually. Og, the king of Bashan, there are a few people who literally were hangers-on, quite literally. Okay, but generally speaking, Noah and his sons and their wives were the survivors, and God made a covenant with them that he was not going to destroy the world anymore, right? But that's a covenant with humanity, because Noah was the progenitor of the human race. The first time in the Torah where God separates a segment of the human race to make a special relationship with them is when Hashem says to Avraham, I will make you a great nation, and you will be a source of blessing. Right? So in that sense, he's Jewish because at this point, God is choosing a nation. So whether you call him Jewish or not, maybe that's not important. In fact, the truth of the matter is, even using the word Jewish is an anachronism, because what is Jewish in Hebrew? Yehudi. Yehudi comes from Yehuda. And even Yisrael is another name for Yaakov, right? So by definition, you can't call Avraham a Yehudi, and you cannot call Avraham B'nai Yisrael or Yisrael, right? But in the sense of having a unique covenant with Hashem, Avraham is the first one. By the way, there are 3 names for Jew. 2 of them can't apply to Avraham yet, but one actually does apply to him. We talk about Yehudim, Jews. That's because Yehudah was the dominant royal tribe of Israel, King David and Mashiach. Yisrael is when Yaakov struggled with the angel of Esav and was triumphant. But there's a third name for the Jewish people, not used that often, Ivri, right? Ivrit is like Hebrew, right? The Hebrew. Now, Avram cannot be called Yehudi, and Avram cannot be called Yisrael. But Avram, in fact, is called, not in the Chumash, but in the Nach, in the Navi Yeshayahu, he is described as Avraham HaIvri, Avraham the Hebrew. What is the connotation of Ivri? Why is he called Avraham the Hebrew? So literally, Ivri comes from Aver, the other side of the river. And that's simply, in a most literal way, that simply means that Avraham comes from the wrong side of the tracks, the other side of the river. What river are we talking about? We're talking about the Euphrates River, east of Eretz Yisrael. What was Avraham's ancestral home? His ancestral home was not Eretz Yisrael. That's Lech Lecha. He was commanded to go to Eretz Yisrael. His ancestral home was in Mesopotamia, in Ur Kasdim. And Ur Kasdim, that's the famous furnace that he was thrown into. In Ur Kasdim, that's east of the Euphrates, in fact, Babylonia. And Avraham crossed over into the land of Canaan, right? That's one reason why we're called Ivrim, because we come from the other side of the river. But the Medrash gives a symbolic meaning to that name. And that is, Avraham was a person who the whole world could be on one side of the river, so to speak. And he was on the other side. In other words, it's not referring so much to a physical river. It's referring to Avraham's faith and Avraham's courage, that the whole world was steeped in paganism, in idolatry, in immorality. And Avraham was not dissuaded by numbers. He was not persuaded by political correctness. He took a stand for goodness and for Hashem, even if initially the whole world might have thought that he was crazy. Now, Baruch Hashem, it happened to be that he had much success in teaching Hashem, about Hashem, to the world. But initially, people thought he was a fanatic. They thought, well, what is this guy coming and talking about one God? So, if we look at the three names of a Jew, you see a beautiful thing. Ivri is the moral courage to stand up for Hashem and to do the right thing and to say the right thing, even if everybody else thinks you're nuts. An Ivri does not define himself by what other people say. An Ivri defines himself by what's right. Now again, I don't mean to say that you are mavazi, you denigrate other people, that's not the issue. But in terms of how you live your life, you live your life in accordance with God's will, even if people think that's a foolish thing to do. That's the connotation of Ivri. Okay, Hebrew. Now, the second name, which is not used for Avraham, but I'll mention anyway just to complete the thought, is we are called Yehudim, Jews. Now, let's go back to this. Why are all Jews called Yehudim? I mean, Yehudah was only one son of Leah. Now, granted, as I said before, it was a very important royal tribe, King David, Mashiach, but still, many Jews are not from Shevet Yehuda. There are 12 tribes. So why would the entire Jewish people be referred to as Yehudah? So the Sfas Emes says a very, very beautiful thought. Leah called her fourth son Yehudah. Why did Leah call her fourth son Yehudah? Because the Torah says, Hapam, now that I have number 4, Oda es Hashem, I am grateful to God. So Yehudah means I'm grateful. Rashi, in the name of the Medrash, raises an interesting question. Why does Leah only express gratitude when she has the fourth son? She had 3 others already, Ruvain, Shimon, Levi. Why is there gratitude, Hoda'ah, only with son number 4? So Rashi brings from the Medrash a very intriguing idea. Leah knew with Ruach HaKodesh that there would be 12 sons out of whom will emerge the 12 tribes. She also knows there are 4 women that'll be the mothers. Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. So if you divide the 12 tribes among 4 women, each one is entitled to get 3. So when she had the first 3, she was not especially grateful because she said, that's my entitlement. I'm entitled to 3. When she had number 4, she wound up having 6 actually, but when she had number 4, she saw that God gave her more than her allotment. When you get more than you're entitled to, that is when you have gratitude. Right? If your boss pays you your salary for the work that you've done, you're happy to get the money, surely, but you don't feel gratitude towards your employer. But if he throws in a gift or something, maybe you will. So the language of Rashi is, the reason why Leah expressed gratitude is Natalti Yeser al Chelki, because she said, I got more than my allotted portion. So says the Sfas Emes, the reason why the Jewish people are called Yehudim is each of us must go through life with the feeling that Hashem has given us more good than we're entitled to. I think I mentioned this a number of times before, that in the South, in certain parts of the South, the word Jew is used sometimes as a negative verb to mean cheat in business or drive a hard bargain. So you might say in Alabama, a person might say to somebody, even though they're not Jewish, don't Jew around with me. Meaning don't be so stubborn or don't try to cheat me or whatever it is. And I want to say, it's not necessarily, these are not like Jew haters, the Nazis type. This is just like casual speech. I mean, nobody, In fact, I don't know, but it could be a Jew. A Jew might say it to somebody else, don't Jew around with me. I remember when the American Heritage Dictionary gave that definition in their slang section. They have a section of American regional slang. So they put Jew as a regional slang to mean don't cheat in business or something like that. So I remember that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, protests. The truth of the matter is, it's a dictionary. I like to know. I personally like to know why are Jews called kike. Whatever the reason is, like all of these different things. So I guess people have different tastes, but I don't necessarily want dictionaries to be censored if they're telling you what a word means or how a word is used. Okay. But here's the thing I want to share with you. If Jew is a verb at all, it means to be a grateful person. In other words, so the word Yehudim is connected with looking at your life with a sense of gratitude. I mean, do you see, this is so amazing. Hakara Satov, gratitude, is so significant that it's in the very name of the Jewish people. We could have been called Shabbos observers. In fact, in some cultures refer to the Jewish people as those who keep Shabbos. Although today that wouldn't include that many Jews. But in classical times, I think one of the Roman names for the Jewish people are the people who keep the seventh day. But that's not what the Torah does not give us that name. But the name that the Torah gives us, actually, well, that's an interesting question. Yehudi does not appear in the Torah. Where is the first time we are called Yehudim? It's very interesting. It's in the book of Esther. So it is a later name, but it is connected to Hakara Satov, gratitude. Go through life with Hakara Satov. That's why we make brachos before we drink water. That's why we make brachos after we go to the bathroom, right? Little kids sometimes make fun of that. Oh, go to the bathroom and make a bracha. Well, there are people that have problems with that function, and they suffer tremendously for it. So the truth of the matter is, if one's body is working okay, you got to be real grateful for that. And the whole halachic system of brachos for food and for bathroom and for mitzvahs are all designed to inculcate within us a sense of gratitude. One of the great teachers in this area was Rabbi Victor Miller, Zichrono Livracha, who died a short while ago. And really, he taught many things. But one of his topics that he taught over 70 years, over and over and over and over again, was the idea of gratitude. He would give talks about what should you think about when you pick up a banana or an apple. I can't really do it justice, but he would talk about the color and the smell and the acidity and tartness of the apple versus the sweetness of the banana, and how God, mixed all these different things together to create pleasure, to create joy. Right? God didn't have to make colors, and God didn't have to make pleasant fragrances. Food could just be, if you need food could just be this tasteless slop that you eat, But God wanted you to have pleasure and enjoyment in things. He even talks about how to raise your child to be a grateful person. He said, we're always complaining about things, and children pick that up. So when it's hot, we say, oh, it's so hot today. When it's raining, we say, oh, it's raining today. Rabbi Miller said, no, when it's raining, you should go out with your son or your child and say, wow, Baruch Hashem, Hashem is bringing water to the earth so things will grow. And when it's sunny, the sun is doing photosynthesis and other things. And this may sound like a little game, and it may not be natural for us, but he says these types of attitudes of gratitude create optimism. They create a sense of joy in life. They create a sense of connection to Hashem, and that can really make a difference in how a person views life, because in every life, you're never going to get everything you want. So if you go through life with a sense of complaint, we're always going to be focusing on what it is Hashem didn't give us, instead of appreciating all the gifts that Hashem gave us. So again, Ivri is the courage to stand on one side of the fence, even if everybody else is on the other side of the fence. Yehudi is to look at the world with gratitude and appreciation. Now, the third name is Yisrael, which is you have triumphed with God, and that refers to the idea that although the Jewish people are often oppressed, Hashem will give them the capacity to triumph over their adversities and eventually achieve redemption, right? So these are the three names of the Jewish people. Okay. But now, going back to Avram, so Avram is the first Jew. So now let's ask the following question. Avram is 75 years old, the Chumash tells us that, and God appears to him and says, leave your father, leave your place of birth, leave your society to the land that I will show you. He doesn't even tell him where to go. In fact, how does Avram even know what direction to walk? I mean, that's a good question. I mean, if God would come to you and say, go to the place that I will say is where you should be when you get there. Well, what direction? Do I go right? Do I go left? I mean, where do I start walking? The answer must be, going back to Avram's intuition, that somehow it was like just like a compass points true north. Avram's compass pointed to Eretz Yisrael. He kind of knew that that's where we had to go. And God gives him a bunch of blessings, and I will make you a great nation. And those who bless you, I will bless. And those who curse you, I will curse. And through you, there will be blessing in the world. It's an amazing thing. People have pointed out, again, I'm not a Navi, I cannot say for sure, that, the United States, hopefully they're not losing it, but the United States was blessed in an extraordinary way with divine blessing over 250 years to create a wealthy society, create a society of opportunity. Again, I mean, I understand there are problems, but overall, compared to every other country. And many have said this was a fulfillment of what Hashem said. Those who bless the Jewish people are going to be blessed. That, again, I know that half of the day here we talk about how bad America is. Okay, and, there's room for that too. But I'm going to be a little bit of a U.S. patriot right now. And basically say that with all of the decadence and all of the materialism in the United States, it gave Jews opportunities in both secular and even religious ways that were denied to them in virtually every country in the world. And they gave the Jewish people blessing. And God says, those who bless you, I will bless. I will bless. So that was the Hatzlacha. And indeed, the countries in Europe have said now, after more than 70 years after the Holocaust, that they've never, like Poland and the like, that they haven't achieved the blessing that they had when the Jews were there. Because once again, God took away the blessing. Because those who curse. So one of the fears I might have for America is that if so much of American society, or particularly Congress or whatever, is turning against the Jewish people, turning against Israel, that's not just a problem for us in Israel. We really don't have to worry about so much. Hashem will take care of us. I mean, all right. With America, without America, we'll be okay. But the people you really should worry about is the United States. Because when there is no longer the idea of blessing the Jewish people, then bad things happen. That's what it is. So on one hand, we get oppressed all the time, but on the other hand, those who bless us get blessed. That's what Hashem said to Avraham. Very, very powerful. Those who bless you, I will bless. But here's the question I want to share with you. And that is, why? Why did God choose Avraham? Why did God come to this Avraham and say, I want to make a covenant with you? Now, we surely know the reasons. We know that Avraham was willing to die for God by being thrown into the fiery furnace. We know that Avraham taught people about Hashem. We know that Avraham lived a life of charity and a life of righteousness. We know that. In other words, there are very good reasons why Hashem chose Avraham. We know that Avraham recognized God on his own from the age of 3 years old. But the point is, none of that is in the Chumash. We only know that from the oral law. If I ask you, open up your Chumash and give me the reason why Hashem appeared to Avraham, there is no reason that is given. Yes, there are reasons, but none of those reasons are in the biblical text itself. So if I would just read the biblical text without commentary and without Torah Shabbal Peh, I would say, I have no idea why God chose Avraham. Now, we know later with the Akedah, in other words, later we have stories of Avraham's greatness. Yeah, that's true. But at the point that Hashem appears to him and says, Lech Lecha, and makes a covenant with him, there's nothing that Avraham is said to have done that would justify it, other than the oral law of the fiery furnace and the like. So the Maharal asks this kasha, and the Maharal gives a beautiful, beautiful reason. Maharal says, there's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that tells us that Ahava Tuluya b'davar. If love depends on a certain factor, I love you because you're handsome, because you have money, whatever it is. No, I didn't mean that exactly as I said it, but okay. So what does it say? It says, Batla davar. If it's a conditional love, when that condition fades, the love goes away. Right? But love that's unconditional remains forever, like a parent to a child. And the Mishnah gives an example of unconditional love. And this was the friendship between David and Yonasan. Yonasan was Shaul's son. Now remember, Shaul wanted to kill David. Shaul thought that David was going to take away the monarchy from him, which in fact Hashem gave the monarchy to David. And who would be the loser? Yonasan would lose it, because Yonasan would no longer be the monarch because of David. And yet, Yonasan so loved David, and David as well loved Yonasan, because this was a love that was unconditional. So listen to what the Maharal says. If God would have said in the Torah, I choose Avraham because he's good, because he's righteous, because he's holy, because he's devoted, and all of that's true, that would have made God's love for the Jewish people a conditional love. Now, what would that mean? What if centuries later, Jews are not so righteous? Jews are not so good? Jews are not so devoted? You would have had Batla Davar. If the reasons why God chose us are no longer present, the love is gone. So the Maharal says, Hashem wanted to structure his relationship to Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, as an unconditional relationship. Yeah, Hashem had reasons, meaning Hashem did have reasons for choosing Avraham, but he expressed it as an unconditional love, so that no matter what the Jewish people do, no matter how much they betray him. Now that doesn't mean there's no punishments. There's galus, there's korban, there are consequences. Unconditional love does not mean there are no consequences to bad behavior. But it means that even when you have those consequences, They are emanating from love and not hate.